You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about how to get out of anxiety and get back into life. And for those of us recovering from trauma, oh my God, we know about anxiety, don't we? And even a lot of us who don't have or aren't recovering from trauma know a lot about anxiety. So this is going to be a great topic. And joining me today is Ann Cravens, who is a holistic health coach. And she is going to be talking about a new modality that she uses to help with anxiety. So I'm really excited to learn more about that. So Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. I always like to learn about new modalities and bring new modalities to the audience. You know, it may be something that that somebody hasn't heard of that may be perfect for them. So I love talking about new stuff like that. So thank you. Excuse me. You know, looking at your bio, so, it says here you suffered poor health as a child, and then in young adulthood, you had a tragic loss. And that's what actually started your holistic journey and turned your health around. Can you talk to us about that?
Right. Sure. Yes. Yeah. So kind of a bunch of stuff going on with my health when I was a kid. Everything from spinal issues, chronic bronchitis, horse injuries, things like that. And when I was 12, my mother got really sick and was hospitalized, ended up being ulcerative colitis. And she ended up having to go through the ileostomy, and she basically was in and out of the hospital for about 2 years. So from the time I was 12 to 14, I was kind of having to grow up really fast. And then that was just 16 years of her illness, and she died of an accidental prescription drug overdose. And it was the eve of the day I was supposed to be getting married. So we found her the morning that I was to be getting married, and that ended up not working out so well.
You think?
But in that, we determined that she had dropped her pills on the floor the night before in her little pill case, the week's pills or whatever, they were everywhere. And she was on at least 10 medications when she died. So she was in this fog anyway. And we think that she doubled up on something, or we don't really know. She was 49 and her heart stopped.
Oh, goodness.
So, of course, that was super traumatic for me. I was only 28 at the time. And at that point, I really just started to reevaluate everything. I was like, there has to be another way besides all these drugs that are, reacting off of each other. And the doctor, she went to so many doctors, and then they were all giving her pain meds. And this was back really before they started doing pain management with people, and kind of even watching that stuff a little bit. And she didn't know any holistic stuff. It was strictly Western medical. Hindsight now with everything that I've learned, she was holding a lot of trauma from her childhood. And I remember a specific moment. I must have been probably 8 or 10 years old. My family, we were driving home late at night. My parents were having a disagreement in the front seat. They thought my sister and I were sleeping in the back. And I remember my mother just proclaiming that the dysfunction was going to stop with her. She wasn't going to pass it to her children. Of course, she was all emotional, crying at the time she was claiming this. But what I learned decades later, when I got into the holistic health, that was the moment that she was claiming it and clutching it and holding on to it with good intention. She didn't want to pass the dysfunction, but at that point, she really internalized it. And I think, in my opinion, that's really what led to a lot of this intestinal stuff she had, her depression, she ended up having Crohn's disease, spinal problems herself, a discectomy. So it was just like this slew of things, because she was kind of this magnet for depression and illness at that point. But I didn't understand any of this as a child. So from then on, from her death on, I should say, I I didn't even want to take Tylenol or Advil or any of the over-the-counter stuff. I suffered with my headaches and everything else I was dealing with. And eventually things started to even out when I did discover alternative things. I became a deep tissue therapist, a yoga instructor, learned things like Reiki, which eventually led me to the body talk system, which is kind of a story in itself. But basically I ended up 7 years after my mother's death, toggling the state around for my first body talk session. I didn't even know what it was. A friend told me I needed to have a session with this woman, Miriam, who ended up popping up in my world 3 times that week. And I was like, oh, maybe I should go see Miriam. So here I am on the table. I don't realize it's the anniversary of her death yet. Not until the end of the session did I put it together. But during the session, Miriam started doing a muscle testing kinesiology thing using my arm. And she was going through a protocol, and she started describing that all of the emotional stuff I was carrying, I was really an emotional wreck at that point in my life. Everything triggered me. But all of that, I had been born into it. And it was something I had picked up from my mother, the conditioning, right? So we did the session. It was just this really surreal thing for me. It felt like I could see the dynamic of my family that she was explaining from my childhood. I just felt it. I saw it, remembered it, however you want to describe it. And then we did some grounding energy techniques that I didn't even understand at the time. And from that moment on, my tension levels, my emotional triggers just started diffusing lighter and lighter and lighter. Of course, I continued with sessions and a lot of my self-help work I was already doing. But it really was a monumental moment for me because nothing I had tried was so effective in getting a handle on things for me.
Wow, that's quite a story. I mean, excuse me, your mom was so young. I mean, gosh, she's my age. I'm 49 now. So,
right.
Yeah,
me too. I just actually crossed the threshold of like how old she was. And I'm very grateful now walking forward. I've lived longer than she did now. So it's kind of interesting. It plays right.
And you're right. That intergenerational trauma, we, excuse me, we store it in ourselves. Any trauma really, but we store it in ourselves. So when your mom internalized rather than passing it on, she had the right idea. She just didn't have the right methodology.
Right.
Because exactly. Internalizing it, it sounds like it just poisoned her body.
Right.
And that's what it does. That's what trauma does.
Uh-huh. And it was back in the days before they gave fibromyalgia a name.
Right.
She had all these random symptoms, and it's stress related, right?
Sure.
But they couldn't put a finger on it. So shortly before they died, they actually had just come up with the fibromyalgia term. And for her, it was a relief. It's like, okay, they realize there's something going on. I'm not just a crazy hypochondriac. And at that same time, she was just discovering, she was just starting to try acupuncture and some other alternative things. And it just wasn't her time. She was just learning that in a different era, right?
Yeah. We think of holistic health, and it's starting to become a little bit more mainstream nowadays and a little bit more accepted.
Right.
I think it still has a long way to go to, kind of work with Western medicine as opposed to, Western medicine just kind of poo-pooing on alternative medicine.
Exactly. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we have a long way to go, but, ideally they need to work hand in hand because there's going to be some things out there that we just absolutely have to have Western medicine for.
Of course. Yes.
But there's so much, I think, that can go hand in hand with it. And doctors they're not made aware of it.
Right. It's interesting you bring this up. In my book, chapter 12, I touch on a little bit of this. The body talk system itself is amazing for this. It really is a marriage of East and West.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking the ancient teachings, and it's heavily based in traditional Chinese medicine theory. And then it's melding that with the new science and that we're using now. So the quantum science now that's coming in and really showing us how things really operate. So the body talk system is wonderful for bringing those two worlds together. And then another level of that, Dr. Laura Stuve and Dr. Janet Gallipo in the Bay Area have what's called Body Intuitive. And they have designed this to teach to healthcare practitioners and of all kinds, really, anything from physical therapy to nurses. It could be doctors, chiropractors, really broad range. And to bring this type of work into their Western training and meld it together so that they can use their intuition more and they can really communicate on a different level with people to help them more efficiently.
That's awesome.
Quite amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So tell us a little bit more about what the body talk system actually is.
Sure. Well, the concept is that the body knows how to heal itself. Like when we get a cut or a bruise or something, we don't have to sit there and stare at it and focus on it and like tell our body every little thing to do to heal that wound. Typically, you cut your finger, you clean it a little, put a Band-Aid on it, and a few days later, it's way better.
Right.
So that's the innate wisdom of the body. And as Dr. Bruce Lipton has shown in his work, trauma, toxicity, and the thought are the three main culprits in breaking down communication in the body. So when the body can't communicate, it can't heal itself. Therefore, if we can start to get things to communicate better, then the body can start to heal itself more efficiently. And as we talk about trauma specifically, we get these memories stored in and all these different things, and it locks in the traumas into the cells, right? So if we can release it out with these different types of treatments rather than holding on, like we're saying, then it helps the communication flow. So it's a distortion having these emotions and these traumas stuck in there, right? And the body can't communicate. So as soon as we can release some of these things, it clears up the signal flow. If you can think of like a traffic jam or something at an intersection, you start clearing that up and things start flowing. Same thing happens within us when we're holding too much trauma, or we call it a charge from an active memory when we're working on it on a practitioner level. So basically, we're using that muscle testing to let the body say what areas need communicating. And then there's this different tapping sequences or places that you hold on the body. And the tapping comes from things you may be familiar with, emotional freedom technique, EFT. It's said to come from ancient Hatha yoga. There's a lot of stories on where it may have originated from. But in body talk, we tap on the three brains. So the brain in the head, the brain in the heart, and also the brain in the gut. And the three being the mechanism of the mind. So we're bringing all of them up to date on what's going on in the current situation or this current trauma or blockage that we're dealing with. And when the body can see it and look at it, it's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. And it can start to make adjustments. So it's really about like shining a flashlight on the problem so you can kind of go, oh, I see.
Right. Yeah. Wow, that sounds fascinating. I've heard of things like massage therapists who can pinpoint areas of trauma that is stored in your body.
Right.
And just really kind of hone in on, oh, you've got this trauma stored here. And they can actually tell you what kind of trauma it is. And I hear these stories and I'm like, how can you tell?
Fascinating now. There's so much There's so much work on intuition now. They found that what's the insula cortex is now the seat of intuition. So they're actually measuring now in science and say, yes, it's real. And my take on it really is everybody has it. It's whether we know how to use it or listen for the signals because of all this extra noise that we're talking about, all this extra stimulation from our external environment, from old traumas, old emotions, current emotions, things like that. And it can manifest, in the physical realm. So you have aches and pains in the body, headaches, and panic attacks, and all those things that come with stress, the sweating, the shaking and stuttering, or however it manifests for someone. There's a multitude of ways, but what I really love about the body talk system is you're not treating those symptoms. We're trying to figure out, or we do figure out by asking the body, what is the root of the problem? What needs to be repaired here? And like I say, sometimes it's that the area of the body can't heal until the trauma is addressed. And that's a lot of where people feel like they're cycling back around with their old habits and their old triggers, and they're working really hard and like, oh, last time that happened, it really got me upset and I won't do that this time. And then here it comes again. Boom. The same trigger. I did it again. And people know their stuff, their hangups and their rough spots. And that's when we tend to avoid situations because we know it's going to come up.
Do you think that, oftentimes we, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ignore, but we put off the healing. And we put off this kind of trauma work because, A, we don't know how to feel without it. And B, it's uncomfortable to go through it. And, and C, it's that uncomfortable comfort zone. I have aches and pains. I know I have aches and pains. I don't know how to live without aches and pains, and therefore I'm just going to accept that this is my life. Right.
And there's a level of that people have to decide, is this how I want to spend my life? Or do I want to keep searching and digging and go down that path and that journey, and how much determination and drive? And one of my massage teachers, she said, how bad do you want it? And what are you willing to do to get it? And I just loved that, and it's true for anything. If you want to be out of pain, if you, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, which typically are closely tied, it's how bad do you want it? And I think, like you're saying, people are afraid to step forward into that because it is scary and it can uproot things sometimes, these old feelings, which again, I'm going to circle back around, which is why the body talk system is so effective for so many people. It's different than, like, say you go to a counselor or something and you got to talk about that old thing, the divorce, the death, the whatever, and you bring it up and you're addressing all these little things. In this type of healing work and the energy work with the body talk system, it's like a subconscious side door that we're kind of going in. And what I found when I work with people and these specific old traumas, it's time for them to surface, and we're working with that, is many times they'll be like, oh yeah, that was when my parents got a divorce or our house burnt down or whatever it is. And we do a little tapping, eye rolling technique related to what some people may be familiar with, EMDR. People Google that. That was where it originated. But it has to do with accessing different parts of the brain that store that memory. And when we do this technique, it can allow this to come up. The person can look at it from a now perspective rather than being in the middle of it. So kind of this outside look at it, and then update the whole body. Go, oh, I'm not there anymore. This is now. I'm safe now from that. And then with that too, it comes up in a nice, what I call a palatable way. And it's not like this traumatic, intense cry that sometimes will happen with counseling and such. Instead, I found like maybe just a little gentle tear might dribble down the side of someone's face. They might kind of a little fluffy, I want to call it a fluffy breath, a little bumpy breath for a second, and then and it's that type of release rather than, oh, here we go into the horror of it, and kind of a sigh of relief afterwards. And that could accompany maybe a soft cry, or maybe people go home and they'll have a little bit of a time with themselves to acknowledge it, so to speak. I think a lot of your listeners probably know what that is. After you go through something, when you kind of sit and get through it, for the next thing. So this makes that much easier. It's not as horrific on the body on all levels as it can be with traditional therapies.
Right, a little more gentle. Nice.
And then once you start getting an experience of that, then it's like, oh, okay, well, now I can tackle more stuff. Let's see what comes up in the next session,
Right.
And it kind of gets exciting because, oh, wow, gaining ground, and it's really, really quite fascinating. And gosh, I've been doing it now for about 15 years, and the science is just growing and growing and growing all the time to support it. And like you say, these ideas have been growing. And I've seen a lot in the last 20 years of it evolving, and it's exciting.
Oh yeah, yeah, it is exciting to kind of see us as a collective start growing and accepting more and more. Your book, it's called Anxiety Antidote: Your Guide for Life's Challenges. Tell us a little bit about what we can find inside.
Oh boy, we have all exciting bunch of tidbits for you in there. From chapters 4 through 12, I've designed, it's almost like a workbook fashion. There's some meditations and journaling and a bunch of ideas. I call them treasure keys that people can apply. I think there's almost 30 of them I put in there along with the meditations and things. Then also, if you go to my website, myantidote.life, and join my email list, you can access a brain balance video that I refer to in the book, the Cortices technique from the body talk system.
Cool.
Which is super, super effective in calming panic attacks and just really anytime you're feeling out of sorts to bring you back to center.
Nice. Yeah, we'll definitely have to check that out. Well, thank you so much, Chris-Ann, for coming on and talking with us today and, teaching us a little bit about this modality, body talk. It's really fascinating.
Well, it's been a pleasure to speak with you, Tracy, and look forward to coming back again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And listeners, make sure you grab a copy of Chris-Ann's book, Anxiety Antidote: Your Guide for Life's Challenges. And be sure you go to her website, myantidote.life, and grab that free the brain video.
Yes, brain balance video. Yes,
brain balance. That's what I'm going for.
Yes.
Apparently, my brain needs to be balanced. It's like a washing machine out of sync. Definitely go grab that and yeah, reach out to Chris-Ann and ask her any questions that you may have about this body talk system and anything else around the holistic healing. I'm sure she'll have no problems answering your questions. So. Again, Chris-Ann, thank you for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, as always, I will have all of Chris-Ann's information in the show notes. Just take a peek down there. And thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.